They called it the Forgotten War, but for those who lived through its devastation, the Korean War was anything but forgettable. It began in the early hours of June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces, backed by the Soviet Union and China, crossed the 38th parallel and launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The world watched in shock as tens of thousands of soldiers poured across the border, crushing South Korean defenses and capturing Seoul within days. This was not just a local skirmish, it was the first hot conflict of the Cold War, a battleground where ideologies collided in brutal fashion, leaving a scar that would divide a nation to this day, the United States and its allies. Under the flag of the United Nations, quickly rallied to defend South Korea. General Douglas MacArthur, the legendary World War II commander, was put in charge of the operation. What followed was a brutal and chaotic struggle, with temperatures swinging from blistering heat in the summer to bone-chilling cold in the winter, testing the limits of every soldier on both sides. The early months were disastrous for the South Koreans and their allies, as North Korean forces pushed them all the way down to the tiny perimeter around the port city of Pusan. It looked as if South Korea would fall completely, but then came a stroke of genius and risk. In September 1950, MacArthur launched a daring amphibious landing at Incheon, far behind enemy lines. It was a masterstroke of military strategy. The landing caught the North Koreans completely off guard, forcing them to retreat in disarray. Within weeks, Seoul was recaptured, and the tide of war seemed to turn in favor of the South. The United Nations forces pushed northward, advancing rapidly and crossing the 38th parallel themselves, with the aim of unifying the peninsula under a non-communist government. But just when victory seemed within reach, a new and unexpected force entered the battlefield. In October 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops, under the banner of the People's Volunteer Army, crossed the Yalu River and slammed into the advancing UN forces. The Chinese counteroffensive was massive and relentless. The bitter cold of the Korean winter compounded the horror, and once again, the momentum of war shifted. UN forces were driven back, Seoul was lost a second time, and brutal battles raged across the mountainous terrain. The war settled into a grinding stalemate around the 38th parallel, with neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. Battles like Heartbreak Ridge, Pork Chop Hill, and the Chosin Reservoir became legendary for their intensity and sheer brutality. At Chosin, surrounded by overwhelming Chinese forces and freezing temperatures that dropped to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, the U.S. Marines famously fought their way out in one of the most heroic actions in military history. Their resolve was summed up by one of the Marines' commanders who, when told they were surrounded, replied, "Good. That simplifies our problem of getting to these people and killing them." Meanwhile, the war was leaving a trail of destruction across the Korean peninsula. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, millions of civilians were displaced or killed, and atrocities were committed by all sides. The use of air power reached new heights, with the United States dropping more bombs on Korea than it had in the entire Pacific theater during World War II. Napalm, still a relatively new weapon, turned forests and villages into infernos, leaving horrific injuries and death in its wake. The human cost of the war was staggering. An estimated 2.5 million people died, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire of a conflict that neither side seemed able to win. The political battles were just as fierce as those on the ground. In Washington, MacArthur's aggressive push for victory led to a dramatic clash with President Harry Truman. MacArthur wanted to expand the war into China, even hinting at the use of nuclear weapons, but Truman, wary of sparking World War III, refused. The disagreement came to a head in April 1951, when Truman made the stunning decision to relieve MacArthur of his command. It was a moment of high drama, watched by the entire world, and it underscored the deep tensions between military ambition and political caution that defined the war. As the years dragged on, the fighting ground to a bloody stalemate, with the front lines barely moving despite enormous casualties. Peace talks began in 1951, but they were slow, contentious, and repeatedly stalled. One of the most bitter points of negotiation was the fate of prisoners of war. Thousands of North Korean and Chinese POWs refused to return to their homelands, fearing execution or harsh punishment, and their fate became a major sticking point that prolonged the war unnecessarily. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. The guns fell silent, but no peace treaty was ever concluded. The Korean peninsula remained divided, with a heavily fortified demilitarized zone, or DMZ, running along the 38th parallel. The war ended where it began, geographically at least, but the human and political consequences rippled far beyond. The Korean War shaped the geopolitical landscape of East Asia and solidified the Cold War divide between East and West. It transformed South Korea from a devastated country into a US allied powerhouse, and it turned North Korea into one of the most isolated and militarized states on Earth. The scars of the war are still visible today, from the separated families to the ever-present threat of renewed conflict. Yet despite its enormous significance, the Korean War has often been overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War in the public consciousness, especially in the West. Veterans returned home to a country that barely acknowledged their sacrifice. Unlike the ticker-tape parades of World War II or the protest-fueled notoriety of Vietnam, Korean War veterans were met mostly with silence. It was as if the war had slipped through the cracks of history, leaving behind little more than a footnote in the broader story of the Cold War, but to the people of Korea, and to the soldiers who fought there, the war was anything but forgotten. It was a fierce, grinding, and devastating conflict that shaped lives and destinies. The Korean War may not have the cinematic glamour of other wars, but its legacy is profound, and its lessons remain as relevant today as ever. The echoes of that conflict still reverberate, reminding us that even the so-called forgotten wars have a way of shaping the future in ways we can never fully anticipate. One of the most striking aspects of the Korean War was the sheer resilience and adaptability shown by both sides in the face of unimaginable hardship. The rugged Korean terrain, marked by steep mountains, dense forests, and deep river valleys, turned every battle into a nightmare of logistics and endurance. Soldiers trudged through mud, ice, and snow, often with inadequate supplies and facing relentless enemy fire. The infamous winter of 1950 to 1951, in particular, became a symbol of the war's brutality, as frostbite and hypothermia claimed nearly as many casualties as bullets and bombs. For the Korean people, life became a daily struggle for survival. Villages were destroyed and rebuilt, only to be destroyed again as the front lines shifted back and forth. Families were torn apart, and entire generations grew up in the shadow of barbed wire and minefields. Refugees clogged the roads, carrying what little they could salvage, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The psychological toll was immense, and even after the guns fell silent, the trauma lingered for decades. The Korean War also marked a turning point in military technology and tactics. It was the first conflict to feature widespread use of jet aircraft, with dogfights between American F-86 Sabres and Soviet-built MiG-15s becoming legendary. These high-speed duels in the skies over Mig Alley near the Yalu River brought a new dimension to air warfare, pushing pilots and engineers to innovate rapidly. The war also saw the debut of helicopters in a major combat role, revolutionizing battlefield evacuation and reconnaissance. On the ground, the use of artillery reached unprecedented levels. Entire hills and ridgelines were pulverized into moonscapes by relentless bombardments. Infantry assaults often devolved into grueling hand-to-hand combat, where every inch of ground was paid for in blood. The bravery and tenacity displayed by soldiers on both sides became the stuff of legend, with acts of heroism and sacrifice occurring daily. Often far from the headlines, one of the less discussed but deeply impactful aspects of the war was the role of international forces under the UN banner. Troops from countries as diverse as Turkey, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, Ethiopia, and Colombia fought side by side with American and South Korean forces. These units brought their own unique strengths and traditions to the battlefield, and their contributions were crucial in several key engagements. The camaraderie and shared hardship forged bonds that crossed cultural and national lines, leaving a legacy of solidarity that persists to this day. The Korean War also had profound implications for the balance of power within Asia. It cemented the United States military and political commitment to the region, leading to long-term alliances and the stationing of American troops in South Korea, Japan, and elsewhere. China's intervention, on the other hand, marked its emergence as a major military power and reshaped its relationship with both the Soviet Union and the West. The war laid the groundwork for the geopolitical tensions that still define the region, from the nuclear standoff with North Korea to the strategic rivalry between the U.S. and China. For North Korea, the war became a foundational myth, enshrining the Kim dynasty's narrative of resistance against imperialist aggression. The devastation wrought by American bombing raids became a central theme in North Korean propaganda, used to justify decades of isolation, militarization, and repression. In the South, the war served as a rallying point for national unity and reconstruction, helping to forge a modern identity rooted in resilience and progress. Despite the passage of time, the Korean War remains a powder keg of unresolved tensions. The demilitarized zone that divides North and South Korea is one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world, bristling with landmines, barbed wire, and artillery. Periodic skirmishes and provocations remind the world that the conflict is not truly over, and that peace remains fragile and elusive. The human stories of the war continue to resonate. Veterans, now in their twilight years, recall the horrors they witnessed and the comrades they lost. Families divided by the war still dream of reunification, their hopes kept alive through letters, brief meetings, and, in rare moments, cross-border visits. Memorials and museums on both sides of the 38th parallel bear silent witness to the sacrifices made and the lives forever changed. In the realm of popular culture, the Korean War has struggled to find its place. Films and TV shows like MASH brought some attention to the conflict, but often through a lens of dark comedy or as an allegory for other wars. Unlike World War II, which spawned countless epic tales of heroism, or Vietnam, which inspired raw and gritty reflections, the Korean War has remained largely in the background, a war without clear villains or victories, a war of endurance rather than glory. And yet, in recent years, there has been a renewed interest in understanding and honoring the Korean War's legacy. Scholars and historians have worked to uncover forgotten stories and bring new perspectives to light. Documentaries and books have shed fresh insight into the war's complexities and its far-reaching consequences. The sacrifices of those who fought and suffered are being recognized more fully, ensuring that their experiences are not consigned to the shadows of history. The Korean War stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of ideological conflict. It was a war fought not for territory or treasure, but for competing visions of the world. Its legacy is etched into the landscape of Korea and into the hearts of its people, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable hardship. Though often overshadowed, the Korean War's impact is undeniable, and its lessons remain deeply relevant in a world still grappling with division and strife. To truly understand the Korean War is to understand the complexity of the human condition, our capacity for both destruction and compassion, for conflict and reconciliation. It challenges us to look beyond the headlines and the history books, to listen to the voices of those who lived through it, and to recognize that even the most forgotten wars leave indelible marks on the fabric of our shared humanity. The Korean War may have been forgotten by many, but its echoes will continue to shape the world for generations to come.